ברוכים הבאים.
ברוכה נמצאת.
תודה. So I have the honor and pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Ivrit B'Merkaz, Hebrew at the Center, to another Sicha session, another conversation, one of a series of online conversations focused on Hebrew. For those who don't know me, my name is Arnie Winchell, and I am the founding president of Ivrit B'Merkaz. Ivrit B'Merkaz was founded over 10 years ago with the mission to revolutionize the teaching and learning of Hebrew. We chose this focus in service of a vision of a world where Hebrew literacy is vibrant, celebrated, and pivotal to thriving Jewish identity and global Jewish community. When we set out as a small group of Hebrew language educators and enthusiasts to disrupt the status quo, we envisioned our contribution to this chalom, this dream, would come through addressing what has been a lack of success in effectively giving the gift of proficiency in Hebrew to Jews throughout the diaspora. We believe that through a deep investment in our educators and our educational system to ensure effective and engaging Hebrew teaching, learning experience, that we will see a Jewish world in which modern Hebrew is not only the language of the state of Israel, but also the language of Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. Through Sicha, we're hoping to engage a wider audience in appreciating the value of investing in Hebrew and in joining us in disrupting the status quo. So we want to thank the Foundation for Jewish Camp for co-hosting today's program. And we want to welcome Jeremy Fingerman and Dr. Sarah Bunin Benor. Sarah is one of the authors of the recently published Hebrew Infusion, a text that explores how Hebrew is present in North American Jewish camps. And Jeremy Fingerman is CEO of the Foundation for Jewish Camp. In this particular webinar, they'll explore their own Hebrew journey, opportunities for strengthening camping in Hebrew, and the role these two play in strengthening Jewish identity in the future. It's both Sarah and Jeremy I have had the pleasure of knowing. Sarah, as I learned more about in this area, and Jeremy because I had the privilege of sitting on the board of the Foundation for Jewish Camp and continue to stay involved and an avid camp advocate. So I not only am an advocate for Hebrew, but also an advocate for camp, Jewish camp. With that, I want to turn it right over to them so that we can begin to benefit from hearing what they have to share with us. And I'll turn it over actually to Andrew Ergis, who is the current CEO, who joined us in May as CEO of Ivrit B'Merkaz. Andrew has a history himself in camping, as well as has been highly immersed in the Hebrew language. And so I want to turn it over to Andrew to moderate this conversation and welcome you. Thanks.
Ernie, thank you so much. And of course, Jeremy and Sarah, it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening for this conversation as we really explore not only the relationship between camp and Hebrew, but also your own experiences as both lovers of camp and lovers of Hebrew, and to provide an opportunity once we've begun the conversation to open it up and involve others who are joining us here this evening. We want to get a quick sense of who is in the room. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put everybody on gallery view, and as best as possible, just raise your hand if everybody turns off their video for one moment. If you know how to turn off your video, what we'd like you to do is, first of all, turn on your video if you yourself went to camp. All right, we have, we can see, it looks like we have almost a full house. Let's turn off the videos again for a second. Turn on your video if the camp you went to, either as a camp or as a staff member, had what you would call a strong or rich Hebrew program. So I see we have a slightly smaller number of people. I do see we have, looks like Drew from Camp Masad. So I know that we have folks who go back to the original source. And I see Walt Winchell. I know he's from Ramah, Wisconsin. Let's all put back on our videos, and we'll go back to our individuals who are spotlighted, and we'll get the conversation going. I'd love to start really with Jeremy and Sarah. I'm just really curious if you can tell us a little bit about your Hebrew journey, and then a little bit about your camp journey. Sarah, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, thank you so much for having us. Looking forward to this discussion. So my experiences with Hebrew began when I was a young child and did Hebrew rituals at home and occasionally in synagogue, and attended a Jewish community center preschool, and then a Jewish day school. And at the day school, there was some immersive Hebrew in my Hebrew classes. And I actually recently found an essay that I wrote in 6th grade in Hebrew. And I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive Hebrew. But most of the Hebrew that I experienced was Hebrew words within English sentences and Hebrew blessings and prayers and songs. And then in college, I took a Hebrew class, and I spent a year in Israel and did Ulpan there, and learned more Hebrew then. And then I got interested in Hebrew through my research project to look at how Hebrew is used at Jewish summer camps. And then I did another research project for which I've presented for you also for Hebrew at the Center on Hebrew education in part-time Jewish schools.
Wonderful. Jeremy, tell us about your Hebrew journey.
Also, you asked about camp too. I guess I should say that too. I attended a sleepaway camp only one summer because most of the time my family would travel in the summer, and that camp was one of those camps that wasn't a Jewish camp, but we dressed in white on Friday afternoon and ate challah. But I did attend a JCC day camp, and I wasn't sure whether to turn on my camera when you said turn on your camera if you went to camp, because I didn't know if you meant specifically sleepaway camp or day camp. But for many years I went to, I know FJC works with day camps too. So I went to the JCC of Greater Washington day camps every summer with Hebrew names like Kaitana, Chaverim, Atid, which was a computer camp. I'm not that old, but back then we thought of computers as a thing of the future. Maccabiyah, which was a sports camp, and Summer Theater of the Arts for youth, not a Hebrew name, but yeah, and we sang a lot of Hebrew songs at the JCC day camps.
And you said Washington, right? It was where you grew up?
Yeah, Rockville, Maryland, yeah.
Rockville. Well, a little bit similar. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. I've said to people, I didn't go to Jewish day school. I was involved in our synagogue and Hebrew school and junior congregation and all that. But for me, really, in my own Hebrew journey, I think camp really triggered so much for me of my engagement with Hebrew, with my connection to Judaism and to Israel. And I know, thinking back, it really sort of exposed me to Hebrew. I then went to college at Columbia, and I remember, I think the first 2 years you had to take a language. So my language was Hebrew, and I think it was 3 days a week. Could it have been more than 3 days a week? I don't know if it was every day. Maybe it was every day. At Hebrew, like 9 in the morning, every day. And so I really think it was camp put me on my path. I learned, I guess, Hebrew at school, and it certainly sort of opened me up for when it was, travel opportunities to Israel, and I guess my long-term goal of getting to Israel. But that's really, I think, my own Hebrew journey. I say to people, ani mevin aval ani lo medaber. So I think eventually it'll come back to me, and I'll be able to be a little more conversant in Hebrew.
I went to Columbia too, and I also took Hebrew there, but I was a comparative literature major, so I took a lot of languages there too.
But when you took but I think it was like every day at 9 in the morning, like, just, I remember thinking maybe I shouldn't have done that, because I would have liked to have slept a little longer.
And then, and your camp, at what point did, besides initially on in learning Hebrew at camp, did your camp journey unfold? Obviously, as CEO of Foundation for Jewish Camp, you're pretty plugged into the camping world.
Yeah, now, but I was Camp Ramah, Wisconsin, as sort of my overnight camp experience. I do tell the story that my rabbi at the time of my bar mitzvah, a rabbi told my parents, you should send him to Ramah. And that's when that a rabbi was the rabbi, and you did whatever the rabbi said. I don't think it works that way too much anymore. But I went to Ramah, Wisconsin, which really did sort of introduce me. It was really a Hebrew environment back then. The announcements, everything was really in Hebrew, and I think camp opened me up to a whole new world, sort of an observance in Hebrew, and sort of involvement Jewishly. And I like to think now, especially as I've watched my own kids went to Camp Yavna. So my camp experience, and then as a parent watching my kids find their own sense of belonging to a community that was not ours. And that I would think back for me, Ramah was my community, not my parents, and Yavna became their community, not ours. And then in the last, I think 10 years, 11 years in this role, I've visited 140 different overnight and day camps. And now I've got such a wide swath of being able to see amazing things happening across the field. So really blessed to have this sense of things.
Yeah, you mentioned your kids going to camp. I didn't think about that as part of my own camp journey, but I guess I should say that my oldest goes to Camp Ramah in California. And then when my second daughter was old enough to go to camp, I was starting my research, and I learned about Habonim Dror Camp Gilboa. And I asked her if she wanted to go there, even though all her friends went to Ramah in California, and she said yes. And so she goes there, and my youngest goes to Ramah in the Rockies, which I brought her with me on my research trip to there, thinking she might like it. And now it's her favorite place in the world, and she will be devastated if it's canceled again this summer. But yeah, absolutely. Sending kids to camp is such a different way of experiencing camp than attending yourself or working there or being a researcher or a professional who visits there. It's a different camp experience.
It's so interesting, because I was going to ask you about sort of differences between being a camper, being a staff person, being a parent. When you think about it through those multiple lenses, we know how powerful camp can be. I'd be interested in your thoughtful perspective on in how do we understand camp as a engine for Jewish education versus how we see camp as this place where identity is built? And are those the exact same thing, or are there some discrete differences between Jewish identity and Jewish education?
Jeremy, I think you should start with this
Okay,
one.
happy to do so. I'm not really sure I can, I think we're dancing on a head of a pin on those two. Like for me, it's all about Jewish connection, Jewish community, a sense of belonging. And I think what camps really are, this engine of putting, of creating a sense of belonging, putting kids on their own path, on their own journey, as I sort of say, away from home, away from parents, and they're beginning to really form who they are, who they're going to become. And in that context, Jewish camp really is the most powerful vehicle we have for sort of creating a connection to the community, for instilling a commitment to Jewish life and Jewish engagement, and a connection to the Jewish people. It all doesn't have to happen in that summer. I think it's important about life that camp is year-round and lifelong, we now say, but camp really is a year-round or a lifetime experience. And you start your path as a camper, maybe you work and but you work there or an alum, but it stays with you throughout your life. And I think that's really the power of the experience. I'll leave it at that. And
Yeah,
turn it to Sarah.
I'm glad you brought up connection, because that did come up a lot in my research for the book Hebrew Infusion. That was something that we heard from camp directors and educators and counselors and even campers, that Hebrew wasn't about becoming proficient in the language at most camps. It was about connection. It was about having a sense of connection to Israel, to the Jewish people around the world, to the local camp community, because Hebrew plays a big role in a lot of camps' distinctive cultures and rituals. And so I do think that connection is something that people should be more explicit about, more intentional about at summer camps, that is a goal of Hebrew use at camp. And some camps actually might have Hebrew proficiency as a goal of camps, and that's great too. But even those camps might also have a goal of connection, not just connection to various communities, various groupings, but also to the Hebrew language itself. The idea that they should feel a sense of personal connection, that is their special language or one of their special languages beyond the English that they use every day.
I agree, but I'd also, sort of say that and maybe that is the sense of Hebrew as like the joyful Jewish expression of camp. And again, it's, from that first year you come in, if it opens the door and puts you on your path. I think Arnie's words were at the beginning of Hebrew as a connection to Am Yisrael, to the people of Israel. And this Hebrew is the language of our people. And we want, I'm sure there's multiple entry points and there's multiple acceleration points during a lifetime in which both Hebrew and Jewish communal engagement, come about.
I want to maybe push both of you a little bit on that. I'm imagining after visiting 140 day camps and residential camps, you have, first of all, some really great swag, but you also you've also seen a wide range of how Hebrew plays itself out in different camps. And obviously, Sarah, you and your colleagues were really intentional about going out and seeing what's happening, so that you could minimally describe, if not then kind of frame for us to access. I'm interested, sort of, where does Hebrew sit in sort of the camping space, and does it in fact, to follow up, Jeremy, on what you and Arnie said, is Hebrew really about this wide range of things, or in most camps is Hebrew about the Israelis who are speaking it and connection to Israel? Is it, do you see it as this link to other Jews in other places, to sort of core values that are manifest in a particular people's language, about the other ways that Hebrews used either ritually or symbolically? Like what's really happening?
Let me first just sort of jump in and say, this is not one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to acknowledge and appreciate the landscape of Jewish camp across North America. It's a diverse range of day and overnight camps, and we respect the differences in approaches that everyone represents. And I always say, not every camp's going to be right for every kid or for every family, but across the spectrum, we can find the camp that's going to be right for each kid. Sarah, as you sort of described, you got 3 kids at 3 different camps, finding the one that's right for them, and great that that they've been able to find the one that's right for them. So I sort of feel the same way about Hebrew, that it's not one size fits all. There's not one approach to Hebrew that we use. We've got to honor and respect all the different approaches. We have Hebrew immersion and Hebrew proficiency. We've got Hebrew infusion. All are in sort of that tent. So I hope that I hope FJC and maybe all of us on this call will help each camp sort of find a way to successfully bring more Hebrew into their summer camp experience in whatever approach they make. Bring it in intentionally, but allow it to create and foster those connections and what I call sort of the joyous Jewish experience that Hebrew brings.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And we definitely emphasize that in our book. And I should just highlight that my book is called Hebrew Infusion, Language and Community at American Jewish Summer Camps. And it's co-authored with my colleagues, Jonathan Krasner and Sharon Avni. And the one chapter is all about that diversity, how Hebrew is used differently in different camps and means different things in different camps. And for example, in that chapter, we talk about Bunin Camp Galil, Camp Sternberg, and Bieber Camp. Bunin Camp Galil is a secular progressive Zionist camp, and there Hebrew is all about Israel and Jewish peoplehood. At Camp Sternberg, it's an Orthodox girls camp, and it's all about religiosity. And then at Bieber Camp, it's a kind of a combination of both Israel and religiosity. But for all of the camps, Hebrew is also about camp. Less Camp Sternberg, because the way they use Hebrew there, I wouldn't even call it Camp Hebraized English. I would call it just Orthodox Jewish English, the way they use Hebrew words within English in their everyday Orthodox lives, and also Hebrew prayers and songs. But at Galil and Bieber, they certainly use Hebrew, Camp Hebraized English, English with Hebrew words, like somebody in the chat is asking about going to the MARP. And yes, I do think of that as a use of Hebrew, even though the word MARP isn't necessarily recognizable as Hebrew by contemporary Israelis. That word comes from marpeah, which is a variant of mirpa'ah that was used on kibbutzim, and it became part of the camp lexicon at Camp Masada in the Poconos and also other camps, and it spread to many camps. So many camps call the infirmary the MARP, and that word kind of stuck. And I do think of that as a use of Hebrew at camp because it has similar effects. It as other Hebrew words that might be more recognizable by Israelis, that it makes people think about Hebrew as part of the camp experience and as part of the Jewish experience.
Yeah,
you used it. I mean, I have had the pleasure of reading the book, and we will certainly reference a few different things that you surfaced here, but can you unpack just a little more that phrase you used of camp Hebraized English? Both, what did you mean and why did you feel like you needed a phrase like that to describe this phenomena?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. It's not Hebrew, it's not English, it's a combination. It's an English sentence. If you're saying Chanichim and Madrichim go to the Teatron for Peulat Erev, that sentence would not be understandable to someone who is monolingual in English or monolingual in Hebrew, right? You need to know the Hebrew words, or they might be monolingual in English and also familiar with the Hebrew that's used at camp. So that's why it's Camp Hebraized English and not Camp Hebrew, right? And in the chat where Ilana asks about na lavir et chalav, that is Hebrew, and that is Camp Hebrew also, because it's a common phrase used at some camps that are much more Hebrew rich than most Jewish camps, like Ramah camps in particular, where Hebrew proficiency is one of the goals.
You had mentioned, Jeremy, this, camp is is a year-round and a lifelong experience, and I certainly, I spent 22 summers at camp and a few years as a year-round camp professional, and have a son who's gone into the family business as well. So I appreciate that. I'm wondering, how does Hebrew at camp, in any way that it's manifested, how does that create linkage between what's going on in the other aspects of the camp community's Jewish life? Or, as was also identified in the book, that for many campers, Hebrew is the thing that makes camp unique. They don't have much Hebrew around them outside of camp, and it's what makes camp special. What's at play there?
So look, I think that's a really interesting thing. So part of the intentional magic of the camp experience, the Jewish camp experience, is the use of Hebrew as part of the common camp language. And again, you're going to see a range of that over the diverse range of camps. But I think it makes those inside the bubble, the camp community, feel special, feel a sense of belonging. It helps them to feel Hebrew as accessible for them. And again, I think as the starting point, perhaps of driving, awareness, introduction, familiarity, but a sense of belonging. I think the belonging is really what's interesting, that you feel a connection to those around you, those who've, come maybe from different cities, and you come together in your camp environment, then you go back home and it's a different environment the 10 months that you're home. But what I think also, Andrew, is important, we shouldn't lose, is the sense of camp as a skill building activity, meaning that each year at camp, you're developing your own experiences, your own skills in whatever they are, whether it's sports, whether it's in the plays, whether it's in Hebrew,
Or cleaning, or sweeping.
Or sweeping, and the yes, the all the chores. I think that is a sense of skill building that I know that I got better year after year in Hebrew. I remember giving a Devar Torah at services in my Nivunim year at Camp Ramah in Hebrew, full thing in Hebrew. And that was a big triumphant moment to be able to, have worked with, I think, a counselor and to help, figure out how to say it and to make it personalized, but to deliver that was a milestone and part of skill development. So I think every camp approaches it differently. We'll talk more about, some of our experiences and what we've actually found in our programs in day camps right now. But I think that's an important element, Andrew, to put into this.
Do you have a take on that, Sarah?
Actually, I wanted to address what Arnie wrote in the chat. Is that okay?
Please.
Okay. Arnie writes, there's an aspect of it being our secret language or our insider's language. And yes, I think that's absolutely the case. And who's on the inside is a question, right? So there's a really interesting J-Date commercial. Has anyone seen this J-Date Hebrew at Camp commercial? Which, well, it's a camp commercial, but I call it a Hebrew at Camp commercial, where a young man is on a date with a woman and mentions that he never lost at Maccabia. And she says, "What's Maccabia?" And he says, "Oh, I'm getting tired." And then he's with another girl and she knows the word Maccabia and he likes her. So, and there you have camp Hebraized English, or a Hebrew word at camp, serving as a connector, right? And making one woman an insider in his world and another an outsider, right? And it's not that they went to the same camp, and even they even say, "Oh, you called it that too," and because it's part of what I would call pan camp Hebraized English. That there are some commonalities that are used at many Jewish camps around North America, and that is something that makes you kind of an insider, right? But it's also an insider in the broader sense of being part of the Jewish people, that the Hebrew language serves as a divider between those in the know and those not in the know. But when you have words at camp like marp or to melt, meaning to be a waiter, to serve, to wait tables, from the word meltzar, because a meltzar is a meltzer and a meltzer meltzes, right? So, those kinds of words might connect you to people in your camp, but not to other Hebrew speakers who wouldn't recognize words like marp and melts. But there are many Hebrew words used at camp that would be recognizable by many Hebrew speakers around the world. And in our book, we distinguish between Jewish words, Jewish life words, or I guess we call them, what do we call them? I think we call them camp words and Jewish life words. That the camp words are words that are used mostly just in the camp setting, whereas the Jewish life words are used in many different Jewish communal settings. So they would include things like Shabbat Shalom and kosher, but not just in the religious domain, but even things like Ruach or Boker Tov that are used in many Jewish communal settings, including camp. And so I would say that the camp words might help to connect people to other Jews who've attended Jewish summer camps. And the Jewish life words would help to connect people to others who are Jewish in America. And some people only encounter those at camp, right? If they come from a Jewish community without, and they don't have any other Jewish communal engagements, they don't go to Hebrew school, religious school, and their Jewish camp is their only Jewish education, then for them, this is a whole new thing. And they wouldn't distinguish between those Jewish life words and those camp words, because those would be the Hebrew words that are unfamiliar to them until they encounter them at camp. But the camp words would connect people to camp people around North America and to anyone who speaks Hebrew for the most part.
I'm curious, as just thinking about other ways that you've seen Hebrew be manifested in either an interesting approach or a place that was more intentional, more thoughtful, whether it's about their signage, about how they're using names or nouns, or even introducing verbs and prepositions. Like, what have you seen out there that you think is pretty intriguing and worth pursuing and learning more about?
Well, I will share what we've had real experience over the last number of years with the Kayetz Kev Hebrew at Camp program, which is a program of Arivim Philanthropic Group in partnership with FJC. But what we have found in that program, first of all, a wonderful tagline. Just think about this: that it's a summer of fun, Kayetz Kev, summer of fun, and it's a lifetime of Hebrew, meaning it opens you up to a lifetime of Hebrew. That's the goal of this. Not that you're going to get Hebrew on that in that summer that takes you forever, although it puts you on your path. So I think all of what camp is summer, and it should be summer of fun. Yes, developing skills and that sort of thing. Singing at camp, doing plays. I was in a number of the Hebrew musicals at camp, and it probably put me on my my theatrical path as well. But I think what's fascinating about Kietz Kef in a summer day camp experience, where we've gone from one camp in 2013 to 12 camps, 650 participants in 2019. We would have been even more in 2020 had this little COVID thing hadn't happened. But we're seeing tremendous increase. We're seeing tremendous retention year after year of kids coming back to the program. And even more, the kids remember after being away, they come back and they remember the Hebrew that they picked up at camp after only 2 weeks that next summer. And what really is compelling to me about this whole effort to develop a more formal, a more proficient Hebrew experience is the halo that has to the whole community, the whole camp community. And I think we should think about this as a sort of a circle where you have different experiences, in camp, but that each one sort of culminates. And what happens in the Kietz Kef program, number one, those camps bring in more shlichim who are populating the camp. They're not only the counselors for the Kietz Kef program, but they're staff for the whole camp. So they're bringing all kinds of music and dance and Hebrew words and to the whole. And I think that halo is a really, really important aspect. I think about the halo even from my own experience of announcements in Hebrew or Divrei Torah in Hebrew or the play in Hebrew. And that aspiration, I want to be like those cool people that are, in that play. But I think in the halo, what we've found and what I saw in visiting some of these camps is that sort of the energy that was coming from that Kietz Kef group, that positive sort of the singing and the cheers that they would have going from one activity to another, that gets everybody from the camp looking at this group. Hey, they want to be, that group's having fun. That group is cool. They have cool counselors and they're doing cool things. They're having great fun and they're coming away with skills too. It's a really, we've learned so much from it, and Razaf has done, a lot of studying of this, so we've got good research on it. But it's giving me real energy around expansion of Hebrew in camp, in all dimensions, but in day camps and in overnight camps. And I think there's a huge, huge opportunity for learning. And again, it's thinking about the cycle. You have, entry points in, you continue to grow and build skills and hopefully build deeper connections that I think, again, halo to the whole camp.
Yeah, so that ripple effect or spillover effect is something that we talk about in the camp for immersion programs. And I wish there were more immersion programs. I mean, right now they're limited to day camps. I'd love to see them in overnight camps. And I know it's complicated and getting buy-in is tough, but I'd love to see that because I think it would teach Hebrew to a lot more people and have those ripple effects throughout the camp. You do see that at Asrui, Olin Sang Ruby Union Institute, which takes a different approach to Hebrew immersion. They reserve that for their oldest campers, whereas in Kietz Kef, it starts with the youngest campers. And I think there are merits to both. Certainly for language acquisition, it's better to start young, but in terms of Asrui, it's a really great way for that camp to make kids look up to the Hebrew division. It's the pinnacle of the Asrui experience that they get to be part of the Chalutzim Hebrew immersion program. But Jeremy, you mentioned the plays in Hebrew. Can you sing for us a snippet or two of?
That's dangerous and unfair, but yeah,
site.
Yeah, well, I do remember, but we'll do that afterwards. Maybe I need
That'll be
l'chaim.
another
We need
Sicha.
a l'chaim before doing that.
Okay.
Let me
I'll
ask
say-
you what. Let me ask you what. Both one last question before we open this up to
Okay, Andrew, I
the
didn't get
room.
to answer the previous one. Sorry. Okay, never mind. We can go on.
Well, I mean, and I don't want to put you in an unfair place, Jeremy, nor you, Sarah. As an academic, um, you've seen a lot of things, and Sarah, you and your team wrote about a lot of things, but it was fairly descriptive. It wasn't particularly prescriptive. And I'm wondering, if the two of you could reflect on one or two things you would like to see manifest in more camps if we're going to make Hebrew a more normative, intentional component of North American Jewish camping.
Yeah, I think I would love to see people taking some of the ideas that we observed at one camp and using it in their own camp. And I'm already seeing that. Someone just recently got in touch with me and said he's working on his camp's plans for the summer, and he's looking at chapter 6 or 7, I forget which chapter, and he's finding it useful to think of ideas for incorporating more Hebrew into his camp. And so some of the things that I'd like to see more of are more intentionality around Hebrew, because often when Hebrew is used at camps, it tends to be just, that's how we've always done it. And I'd love to see camps really think about what Hebrew words we want to use, what songs we want to use, how can we incorporate fun Hebrew activities into our camp routine, and why? Why are we doing this? Is it to teach Hebrew? Is it to foster connection? And the why, the ultimate educational goal, the outcome that you want, has to be correlated to the actual use of Hebrew. And I do think one of the goals is making Hebrew fun. So I guess I'd like to see more fun activities. One of the goals is to make people feel a sense of connection to Hebrew, and through Hebrew to Israel, to the Jewish people, and to the camp community. And Hebrew plays a big role in that sense of connection. One way that it does that is by making it fun. And so I'd like to see even more wordplay and skits and fun activities, like you can read about in chapter 5 of my book.
Just picking up, one of the things that I loved about the book is the reminder about sort of the history of the camp experience, that the I think it's post World War I, but the start of the Zionist camps and the Hebrew camps, there was a precursor to aligned with Zionism, a precursor to the foundation of the state of Israel, and so much Hebrew that was part of the pre and immediately post state of Israel. I think we have so many camps that actually were founded right around the time of the state of Israel, either right before or right after. So they're sort of in that 70 to 75-year-old camps now. And I hope we can get back to, have camps continue to go back to their DNA that was rooted in, the Zionist experience, Hebrew experience, and people came away with a connection to the community and to each other, but also a strong connection and engagement with Israel.
Yeah, and I'll just mention that in the chat, there's a point about Camp Masad in Manitoba, and that's a very important point. Thank you, Drew. That camp is a Hebrew immersion camp where most of the camp activities are conducted in Hebrew, and the kids are very creative in Hebrew. They have shtick where they create their own plays and skits and songs in Hebrew. So there's a lot of Hebrew creativity going on there.
Great. I want to really open it up to the group, but so that we have a little bit of seder, a little bit of order. If folks either want to post a question in the chat, or indicate, by raising your hand using the reactions button, on your on the Zoom page. We'll circle back to you. But we'll start with Anat Toledano asked a question sort of about singing in Hebrew at camp. I don't think she was putting in another pitch to get Jeremy to sing for us, but maybe can you both speak to the way in which the use of singing, of music in Hebrew advances the Hebrew agenda at camp, as well as the camp agenda at camp?
I think it's the comment about making Hebrew fun, making camp fun, right? The part of singing and dancing together is the creation of community, that sense of belonging. And you build your sense of confidence with the skills that are acquired, with the songs that are remembered. I'll admit on this call, and I think I've donated the money back, but I did take from Camp Vermont, Wisconsin, my last year, the Shiron, the songbook. And some days, Yom Ha'atzmaut, I think I pull it out and I just sit by myself and I go through the Shiron and I sing these songs to the tunes that I remember from then. What an amazing connection. And the fact that I remember sort of the skill and the confidence I have and the connection that I feel, really, really powerful. So I do think that the role of singing and dancing, I happen to be a very good Israeli dancer. Where did that come from? That we were taught that at camp. And it was a skill developed and my confidence in that. And if the song comes, I'm ready to go and dance because that's what I learned and developed at camp. So yeah. I think those are really, really important, connection points.
I agree. And people tend to remember songs. And that's why I asked you if you could sing some songs. I won't ask you again, but I will say that some of the people we interviewed who attended Ramah camps and Young Judea camps and Habonim Dror camps remember songs that they learned at camp, especially songs that they performed in theatrical productions. So one woman told us, Annie, get your gun. I think it was Bachur lo tovsim beroveh, or Yom Maksim Avivhu, some enchanted evening, right? And those songs are really important for people's sense of connection to Hebrew and knowledge of Hebrew because they learn words from them, but also anytime they hear the English version of those songs that they're based on, they think of their camp, right? And in fact, another thing I mentioned in the book was a friend of mine posted on Facebook about on the anniversary of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and that she knows that in Hebrew, right? And that is still stuck in her head so many years later. Every time she hears Sgt. Pepper, she thinks of the Hebrew version of it. And that's pretty amazing. So it's not just about singing Hebrew songs at camp, although any Hebrew song at camp can have a positive impact, but specifically singing Hebrew translations or versions of show tunes or American pop songs can have a really interesting impact on people. And many of our interviewees talked about learning Hebrew words later in life when they were taking Hebrew classes or when they visited Israel and realizing that they know the word from a particular song and they sing the song. And so the songs are so important, and any Jewish educational context should use singing.
So now that we've heard you sing, Sarah, and we've heard about Jeremy's dancing, I'm thinking we're going to do Hebrew in Camp, the musical, and we're partially staffed out. I want to make one correction. You can raise your hand in the reaction, not in the reactions, but in the participants. We did get a question, Sarah, if you could speak to this. This is from Joel Hellman. One, he was sort of interested in your own involvement in an immersion program. And then he also wondered, is there a double-edged sword? If Hebrew is like the secret language, does it then create, perhaps exclude a broader Jewish community from feeling like they can be a part of that? So I don't know what order you'd like to take those in, or if Jeremy also has a perspective.
Well, I'll start with the secret language excluding people. Yeah, we definitely found that. In fact, someone I interviewed who did not attend a Jewish summer camp talked about being left out when her friends talk about camp because she doesn't understand what they're talking about. And this is someone who's fluent in Hebrew. So, I mean, it's pretty interesting how Camp Hebraized English can exclude. And even at camp itself, that is a danger that if you use a lot of Hebrew words, that it's possible that some people will feel alienated when they first get to camp. But camps have ways of mitigating that, especially very Hebrew-rich camps like Ramah. They will, and I imagine, I'd love to hear from the person who's involved with Mossad Manitoba about how that is mitigated there. But at some Ramah camps that I visited, I noticed people translating some of the words that are used in Camp Hebraized English in the first few days of camp. Or if there are announcements at a Bunin drawer camp, on the first few days, they'll translate them. But then they don't do that anymore after a few days. And if people don't understand, they pick it up by following their camp mates, or a counselor might explain it to them.
I want to just share an observation related to the Camp Mossad in the Poconos, not Mossad Manitoba, but the camp that does not exist anymore. And the depth of connection that the alumni of that camp feel to that experience, so incredibly powerful. And I think Hebrew as the glue, and they would all repeat, play back the songs, the show tunes, playing baseball in Hebrew. It was also a time where Judaism was more accommodating, more pluralistic. I believe, just that people were welcomed from multiple streams and felt a part of things. So incredibly powerful. I like to say that if FJC, Foundation for Jewish Camp, had been around when Mossad was having some challenges, we would have made a shit off and found a way to keep that camp going. It was too important to the into the whole landscape of the Jewish world. But what's amazing to me is the depth of connection of the alumni, and then the what has stayed with them, and what they treasure sort of as a part of that experience. Really a lesson for all of us to consider. We shouldn't you don't have to shy away from Hebrew. That was a great example where forcing people in, they learned, there was a skill, there was also that aspiration. I want to be like those counselors and be like, that was a really important experience, an important camp.
And I see Frida Robbins. If you want to unmute yourself, I see you have a question.
I would like to point out that there is a large population of young ones who could be also worked with on immersion, and that is the children of staff. We have done it in Camp Ramah in New England. It was quite successful, and we learned many, many lessons. And by the way, it was a project of JTS, of the Jewish Theological Seminary at the time. And we learned tremendous lessons from that experience. And so here is a population that we wanted them to start at age 2, at age 3. They can start we can start them off at age 2 months as children of staff. So, and you were talking about the connection of the campers to the Hebrew. Granted, my children speak Hebrew, as you can tell by my accent, but the lullaby that my daughter sings to her daughter, her 5-year-old daughter, is the Camp Ramah song, "Baboker kam parpar ve'af me'ver l'geder." That's her lullaby. And they are very, very best friends. Both my twins are their Camp Ramah friends. There is nothing parallel to that. But I'd like to say also that Israelis find connection to the American Jews, which have not been found before. And that's what made me go back to JTS and get my education there because of Camp Roma. So we should look at both sides.
Yeah, I just want to pick up, Andrew, just on the one
Please.
aspect of that that connection of Israelis and North Americans. That's what I mean about the halo or about the circle, right? All of this works on multiple levels, multiple dimensions. We think about bringing in shlichim to teach Hebrew or to teach Israeliness at camp. Think about how much transformation takes place among the Israelis experiencing joyous Judaism, non-Haredi, joyous Judaism in North American summer camps that they go back to Israel. That is an incredibly powerful experience. And I salute the Jewish agency that is really working hard for the power of the reverse, of the total mifgash, right? Of both ways. And I even think of reverse mifgash, maybe as part of our Hebrew development, that more kids will go to Israel and work in summer camps in Israel as a way of bringing North American, but also bringing Hebrew and developing their own skills in Hebrew in a summer. Could be a great opportunity.
I was also referring to the Israelis who live here, who tend to gather together and not spread themselves into the American Jewish society. And that I can, if I look at myself as an exemplar, that experience with Camp Ramah made me into a Jewish American, Israeli Jewish American, not just an Israeli in America.
Yeah, there are a lot of Israeli Americans at many Jewish summer camps, and obviously a lot of shlichim and other Israelis who aren't brought officially as shlichim. But we have a whole chapter about that relationship between the shlichim and Hebrew, and it's pretty interesting how they start to learn Camp Hebraized English even during their training seminar in Israel, and they gradually realize that the way that they speak Hebrew isn't exactly what most camps want. Some camps do want them to speak Hebrew, but they often have trouble speaking Hebrew to the Americans because they know that the Americans won't understand everything they say. And so they end up slipping back into Hebrew, even though some of the camps want them to, slipping into English, even though the camps want them to speak Hebrew.
I'm curious. Frida mentioned 2-month-olds, and then we also had reference back to the Mossad in many years ago. Alana Weinberg posed the question, like, what are the differences actually between, not just about camps, but between campers today and say 30 years ago in relationship to Camp in Hebrew?
Well, our book has a whole historical section where we talk about Ramah camps and Union of American Hebrew Congregation reform camps, and also Camp Mossad in the Poconos, and how they changed over time. And that's a constant. Change is a constant, right? That throughout history, American Jewish camps have always been changing in how they approach Hebrew, how much Hebrew they use. And so the answer to the question of 30 years ago versus today really depends on the camp. In some camps, there's more Hebrew used today, and in some camps, there's less. And in some camps, they relate to Hebrew differently than they used to, perhaps more connected to Israel or less connected to Israel. But when we talk to alumni who graduated 30 years ago versus today, I think some similarities in that they think of Hebrew positive. They tend to think of Hebrew positively and do talk about how they incorporated Hebrew into their everyday lives, or about how learning Hebrew later makes them think about their camp experience, or their camp experience helped them to learn Hebrew later. So I think we do find a lot of similarities there.
Jeremy, what do you see both in, not just in terms of those changes over time, but actually the campers themselves, and obviously by extension staff, how different are they 30 years later?
Well, I'll make 2 observations. One, the parents have gotten a lot worse, meaning I think I went away to camp. I was gone for 8 weeks. There was no other option. You were just gone. You get letters. That was it. Whenever Hayom Yom Dar, and you had to write a letter to even get into the meal. But it wasn't, there were no pictures posted. You don't have parents who are refresh. They want to see their kids. I think the parents have gone off the wall. We need to let campers and staff and let the camp be camp, and let them have that experience. So there's two components to that. That's one is changed to, you have shorter, the full summer now is one session, and one session was 4 weeks. Now you pay for 4 weeks, maybe you get 3 if you're lucky. It's shorter and shorter time. So it goes back to something Sarah said earlier. How can you be far more intentional about every day in your camp experience, on all dimensions, on Hebrew, on how you transmit the culture of the camp, but you have less time. And so that's why we have to think about what's the connection point year round. How do you keep going and lifelong?
Are there parents who on the flip side are kind of pushing and trying to advance a Hebrew agenda at camp?
Yeah, well, I think there are parents who are definitely into skill building and skill acquisition, and especially for younger kids, what we're seeing in the day camp experience, that you can come away and not have a summer of fun, but a summer of skill building as well. I think so. There are parents that are hoping that their kids will develop that'll also halo back at home, halo to the parents themselves. I think as it relates to Israel, I think the point probably over time camps have put less focus on it, but again, I think there could be an initiative to bring more Hebrew in its biggest, largest sense back into camps as would be a wonderful initiative for for our work, which is to bring more of an impact Jewishly, to make a deeper connection to Israel and to Jewish peoplehood.
Great. We have a question or a comment from Shira Ravin.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Andrew, and thank you all. First of all, I'm fascinated because looking back a couple of years ago, we didn't have this conversation, and I really appreciate this opportunity that we talk about Hebrew and the place of Hebrew at camp. It's very important, and we all agree it's part of our inheriting our identity, Judaism, community, passion to Israel. It gives so much, and this conversation for itself, it's a step up. So thank you. I want to add one more thing. You mentioned, Jeremy, that Camp Masad, in the old time, and I know many people that went there speaks fluent Hebrew today because of that camp long time ago. And this this program of proficiency speaking at camp was gone. Not many camps are trying that, but from the period of time that I'm involved in Kites Kef, I learned actually that the magic happened. Kids don't ending up after one summer Hebrew speakers. We all know that. But the passion for Hebrew increased. It's beyond one word. So I know it takes effort sometimes to change the perspectives and try a little bit different approaches. But I think there's place for everything. There is a place for awareness, and there's a place for list of words, and there's a place for everything as long as we keep the Hebrew alive in so many ways and aspects. But as for my own experience, I really saw the magic. And luckily in this beautiful gathering, I have some people who experienced themselves literally operating, and from 14 kids, it turned out to be like in Toronto for 120 kids. And pushing years after year, not just the parents, the kids themselves wants to stay. So something happens there. And I think, Sarah, the next research that I would love to see you doing, this is your next step. See how it goes in those camps. Why not? Why not to see what happened in this magic and see how it can influence and increase in other places? It's very hard to convince a camp to start it, but the minute they do, it's an easy work for me. I don't need to convince them anymore. They know what the impact is. So just putting out there another idea for new directions.
Great, Shira, thank you. And of course, I appreciated your passion and the importance of these conversations. And obviously, we hope many of you will continue to participate in these different conversations as we move forward. Maybe we'll close with an opportunity both for Sarah and Jeremy. If you want to reflect, obviously we've talked about Hebrew at camp and Hebrew, but when we think about it in a broader way, what gives you hope? Where can we go as a whole to strengthen Hebrew here in North America?
Okay, well, I guess what gives me hope is the amazing creativity I saw when I visited 27 camps, and just how diverse and also similar our North American Jewish community is. That there are things that I saw at many, many camps, and then there are things that I only saw at one camp. But that gave me hope. Just the passion with which people approach camp, and not just Hebrew at camp, but camp in general, and the creativity that I'm seeing among senior staff, but also counselors and campers, and the passion for what they do.
I agree with Sarah, and I would add just two more aspects. One is just take a moment to think about the incredible pressure that the camp professionals have been under for the last now 10 months. The heart-wrenching decision they made in canceling camp in summer of 2020, or for those that operating on a very limited or a partial schedule. What gives me incredible hope is the resilience of the professionals to have weathered that storm, the generosity of funders that have stepped up and basically mitigated the bulk of the challenge in 2020, and the level of interest right now that parents and kids are expressing. They're signing up in record numbers right now for camp, at least the returning campers. I think a new family, maybe it takes a little bit more because they haven't experienced the magic yet. But as camps have opened, I'm encouraged and have hope that we're going to come out of the pandemic. There will be aspects of what we've learned that will stay with us, but I'm hoping that things like Hebrew that were important to me and my own experience growing up, that will continue to be make an impact and be important for hundreds of thousands of campers across the many Jewish camps that we have going forward.
What a fantastic conversation and discourse. I am just really so appreciative that you're with us, and we'll bring back Arnie to give us a few closing comments and thank yous.
I just want to thank everybody who joined us. We had representatives from the Jewish Education Project, from Kayetz Kef, from the Steinhardt Foundation, from the Council for Hebrew Language and Culture, Hebrew at the Center team, past board members of FJC, and members of our own Sicha advisory group, who helps us think about what are the interesting conversations to bring to all of you. But most of all, I want to thank Jeremy and Sarah for giving us of your time, for your investment in this. We recently had a convening in which we focused a whole day on this topic, collaborating with the Foundation for Jewish Camp and Kayetz Kef and the Jewish Agency to really think about how do we move this agenda forward. And so I really appreciate continuing the conversation and everybody that's joined us. It's going to take all of us. Need a little army on the ground to move us forward. And so thank you very much. I want to just give people a heads up that our next Sicha will be on January 13th. It's actually going to be at noon Eastern time in order for one of our speakers to participate from Israel. We'll have Isaac Herzog Bougie, chairman of the executive of the Jewish Agency, in conversation with David Koshitsky, who is CEO North America of IKO and has been a lay leader involved with the Jewish Agency and the Jewish National Fund, who lives in Toronto. They're going to be speaking as Hebrew as the connector of the global Jewish community. And then we'll be having additional programs, one in Hebrew, looking at insights from the diaspora of Hebrew education beyond North America, and with Dr. Ringwald, Dr. Vardit Ringwald, and Rabbi Sergio Bergman. And we'll have one called Stop Calling It Hebrew School, Reframing Hebrew in the Jewish Education Space, with Dr. Netta Avineri and David Breifman, who had joined us here this evening. And then The Art of Translation of Modern Hebrew Language, Literature, Film, and Television, with Stuart Schaffman and Zierler. So you can find all of these information about all of these at our website, HebrewAtTheCenter.org, and recordings of our past sichot and presentations of research under Skira. I want to remind anybody who's with us from the advisory to stay on and join us in a breakout room. And I want to thank you all for being with us. Stay safe, stay healthy, and let's look forward to a year when we can be back in camp.
Here, here.